Have you ever seen those before and after pictures, right? Usually in regards to a new diet or workout routine. But they're always exaggerated, right? Like the before picture, they're always like this, right? They always stick their stomach out and and then the after picture, you breathe in and you do that. And it's like nothing can substantially change, and all you have to do is really change your pose, and it looks like you're a different person, right? Imagine, you're like this. This is before. This is after, right? Well, when we talk about the resurrection, we're essentially talking about before and after. We're talking about before, which is what we are in right now, and then after. But instead of just a different pose, when we're talking about diet and exercise, we're composed of the same body. All we're doing is transforming the current body that we have into something different, usually healthier, right? Healthier and more fit. When we talk about the resurrection, we're talking about not the same body, not transforming the same body into something else, but a completely different body, but with a continuation from before. We're going to go into this a little bit more. In fact, this is what we're going to be talking about today, about the resurrection. We're talking about our resurrection, because when Jesus died and resurrected, if you've been around church for a long time, or long enough, you know that when we're talking about resurrection, we're talking about Jesus, his death, and his resurrection. That is what the core of Christianity is about. Jesus' death and resurrection. We don't talk about our resurrection a whole lot. The fact that we will also resurrect from the dead, along with Jesus. He was the one that opened up for us the possibility of resurrecting. And so we will also, along with him, resurrect with him. What does that look like? In verse 35 of 1 Corinthians 15. This is a passage that we've been going through for the past now 3 weeks, culminating next week, which is Easter. Happy Easter. I like to call it Resurrection Day because it seems more appropriate. But 1 Corinthians 15, starting from verse 35, someone may ask, how are the dead raised? With what kind of body will they come? And this is a good question. This is a good question. Glad you asked. It's a good question because we're curious about, Jesus died and resurrected. He defeated death. And so those of us who are in him, who believe in him and participate with him in his death and resurrection, we too can anticipate one day when this old body dies and we are buried in the ground, we will resurrect at the right time. And what would that look like? What is that going to look like? That's a good question. So as we go over our passage today, 1 Corinthians 15, verses 35 to 49, and look at the analogies of the resurrection body in order to understand what the afterlife is like. Look at the analogies of the resurrection body. So let's read in verse 35. 1 Corinthians 15, verse 35, starting from there, it says, "But someone will ask, how are the dead raised? With what kind of body will they come? How foolish." I guess that wasn't a good question. Paul says, how foolish. How foolish. It's a good question, though. How foolish. What you sow does not come to life until it dies, unless it dies. And when you sow, you do not plant the body that will be, but just a seed, perhaps of wheat or of something else. But God gives it a body as he has determined, and to each kind of seed he gives his own body. Not all flesh is the same. People have one kind of flesh, animals have another, birds another, and fish another. There are also heavenly bodies, and there are earthly bodies, but the splendor of the heavenly bodies is one kind, the splendor of the earthly bodies is another. The sun has one kind of splendor, the moon another, and the stars another. And the star differs from star in splendor. So will it be with the resurrection of the dead. The body that is sown is perishable, it is raised imperishable. It is sown in dishonor, it is raised in glory. It is sown in weakness, it is raised in power. It is sown a natural body, it is raised a spiritual body. If there is a natural body, there is also a spiritual body. So it is written, the first man, Adam, became a living being. The last Adam, a life-giving spirit. The spiritual did not come first, but the natural, and after that, the spiritual. The first man was of the dust of the earth, the second man is of heaven. As was the earthly man, so are those who are of the earth. And as is the heavenly man, so also are those who are of heaven. And just as we have borne the image of the earthly man, so shall we bear the image of the heavenly man. Amen. Well, there are many analogies in this passage that Paul gives to help us understand what our resurrection body will be like. The first is an agricultural analogy, verses 35 to 38. Paul says, just like a seed, it's sown in the ground, but after a period of time, it's raised up into something else, like a plant or a vegetable or something like that, which is essentially a plant. Right? So right now, we're like a seed. We're characterized by certain qualities, a certain essence. We have a particular essence. But once we die and go into the ground, this is a really good analogy for us. Because once we die and go into the ground, right, which is the typical way of dealing with the body, right? Some cremate, some are cremated, others are put into a casket in a wall, right? But for purposes, we go into the ground. Once we die and go into the ground, we will be raised as a body of a different essence. So right now we're seeds, but we can anticipate the day that we will become a full-fledged plant of some sort. You can choose your own adventure, what kind of plant you can imagine. Man, I want to be like one of these oak trees, these sturdy trees, or probably not saying I want to become a thing of lettuce because a rabbit's going to eat me or something like that. Anyways, the seed is sown into the ground, brought up as a plant. That's an agricultural analogy. There's an animal analogy as well. Verse 39. Verse 39 says, all flesh is not the same. Men have another. Verse 39 here. People have one kind of flesh, animals have another, birds have another, and fish another. This is pretty true. Like especially if you're not like a vegetarian or a vegan. Those of us who consume meat products or meat, we know we know that meats are different from each other, you know. And I'm a meatitarian. I like different types of meat. I don't like bats. Sorry, that was probably too soon. Okay, you could just edit that part out. But I like different types of beef, pork, poultry, chicken, and some types of gamey meats too, like bison. I had a bison burger once, and it was like interesting. It was really interesting. I enjoyed it, and different types. But you notice that you can tell, even if you're blindfolded, right? You're blindfolded, and someone put like a set of plates before you with different types of meat. You can kind of like chew on it and kind of figure out, okay, I'm tasting beef right now. I'm tasting chicken or pork. That's because it's a different type of essence of this animal, right? And humans have a different type of essence. It's saying. So, with that analogy, that different types of creatures have different essences, bodily essences, so our resurrected self will have a different essence. be a different type, a different kind of body or flesh than what we have now. Okay, what that looks like is not explained so much. We're going to have to look into something else, glean from other passages of Scripture. But that is the animal analogy. And finally, there's a celestial analogy. Analogy from the celestial beings, like the sun, moon, stars, right? Well, we know now, in modern knowledge, that the sun is a type of star, but it also has a different essence. And so these celestial elements all have different essences among each other. Another analogy that I would add, one that we're familiar with, is caterpillar and butterfly, right? I remember in grade school, we actually had caterpillar. Each of us had a caterpillar, and we would ensure that it grew up, and we'd keep it in the container, glass container, and we'd watch it eventually throughout the school year develop into a beautiful butterfly. And they are of different essences, but it's the same being, right? Caterpillar turning into a butterfly. It's amazing. It's amazing to see that, actually, because a caterpillar is not a particularly beautiful creature, but a butterfly is. And so this is the analogy. These are the various analogies of what the resurrection body is like. And so it's a setup to the question, what kind of body do the dead resurrect in? So what is it going to be like? So when we die and we resurrect from the dead, what is it going to be like? What is it going to be like? Well, there's 4 characteristics that Paul gives as to what our resurrected body was going to be like. In verse 42, the first one, it says, so it will be with the resurrection of the dead, the body that is sown is perishable. The body that is sown, going back to the seed analogy, is perishable. It is raised imperishable. So the first characteristic is that it is perishable versus imperishable. Now, you know what this means, right? We know what perishable means, especially those of us who handle groceries. We differentiate between perishables and imperishables. Perishables are items that deteriorate over time due to just being exposed, just existence. They don't last long. You know, like a banana. I used to eat bananas back in the day, but I would buy too many bananas, and I wouldn't be able to eat all of them. And so after about a week or so, they turn brown and soggy, and it's no longer nice to eat. It's mushy. It's not nice. I like avocados too. I don't know if you like avocados. Anybody out there? Yeah? Okay. I like avocados too. I would buy a bag of them, but then I'd forget about it. I'd stick them in the fridge, so maybe they could last a little longer. What I actually would do is I would buy them slightly unripened, because that's how they come usually, right? And so you'd have to wait a day or two before you eat it, just to make sure they're ripe. And you squeeze it and see the softness. Well, I would buy it and then wait for it to ripen, and then I would forget about it, and then next thing you know, they're just, it's been a week or 2 weeks, and they've gone bad, they've perished. Versus, instant ramen, instant noodles, right? Those things last forever. You could buy it and eat it 3 years later, and they haven't perished. It's amazing. Not that I eat instant ramen a whole lot, but with this quarantine thing, self-isolation going on, it's a lot easier to do that. Let me tell you. In any case, our present bodies are perishable. The bodies that we are living in right now are perishable. It perishes. And what we have to look forward to in the resurrection life, in our resurrection bodies, is that our bodies are going to be imperishable. That they don't go bad. So the analogy of bananas and avocados versus instant ramen noodles, that one's healthier than the other, right? But that's where the analogy stops. But our resurrection bodies will be imperishable. They will not decay. And for those of us suffering from various injuries or ailments physically, some of us, as we get older, all of us, I think, as we get older, are not the same. I remember when I was in my 20s, as I was a youth pastor, I would play basketball Sunday early evenings, play basketball in the church gym for like 4 or 5 hours straight, and we just be playing straight, and afterwards we go get a burrito or taco and just hang out for another hour or two. And ask me to do that at my age right now, 4 or 5 hours of playing an intense sport, running up and down and things like that. I can't do that anymore. Maybe for like 1 or 2 hours, but it's, our bodies decay. And then ask me in 20 years to do something like that. Some of us who continue to be active may be able to, but still the body is not the same as we get older. There's still some kind of decay, right? And so that's the first characteristic, perishable versus imperishable. The second is dishonor versus glory. Dishonor versus glory. So in verse, 40? 43, it says, it is sown in dishonor, it is raised in glory. Now, dishonor, what does this mean? Does this mean that our current bodies are dishonorable? There's some nuance that needs to be here. There's some differing opinions on this, according to the scholarly community. This word literally is without honor. There's a negative prefix, in front of it, in front of this word honor. It's without honor. It's the word without honor. And it's in relation to the word glory. And what this word means, dishonor, what it means in application to this passage here, is that it does not have the honor or the glory that the resurrection body has. And one illustration of this is the idea of nakedness, right? Now, the reason why I'm wearing clothes today, and most days, every day, even though I am in self-isolation, is because nakedness is seen as shameful. And it's not just a social construct. There is an innate sense within humanity. Even whether you're in a developed country or an underdeveloped country, maybe there's more skin being shown, but there is still coverings of some sort in most societies, if not all in general. And it's because nakedness is seen as shameful. This is seen in a couple different ways. One illustration of this is when in Genesis, when Noah was found in his tent, he was all drunk and naked, lying in his tent. He had 3 sons, and one of his sons comes and finds his dad. He's all drunk and naked. And he's like, look at that. He's drunk and naked. And he tells his brothers, like, come, look at dad, look at that. And that was shameful. And so Noah, when he found out, put a curse on this son to illustrate how shameful it was, even though it was his own fault for getting drunk and getting all naked, right? But it illustrates that nakedness is seen as shameful because it's an exposure to our bodies. On the other hand, I was thinking about this, Michelangelo's David, the statue of David, right? Famous statue is a depiction of David who is naked. And that's not seen as shameful. It's a work of art. It's seen as a work of art because it is a depiction, but it is not human flesh. It's not composed of the same essence. So removing the humanity from it, it's an icon, an image of a human being. It doesn't have that same shamefulness or nakedness or dishonor. So nakedness reveals the dishonor or the lack of glory or honor that comes from being naked. If I were to run down the street naked, I would get arrested by police for indecent exposure, right? Because we have this sense. The resurrection body, the new body that we're going to have, is sown in glory. And what that probably means is that nakedness is not going to be an issue in the resurrection. It won't even be on our radar. It just won't even be a thought like, hey, you're naked. That won't even be a thought that we have. It just wouldn't be an issue because of the nature of the essence of this resurrection body. So perishable versus imperishable, dishonor versus glory. Number 3, weakness versus power. Our current bodies is sown in weakness. This word is sometimes used in the sense of illness in the New Testament. Is raised in power. So weakness and power. There are no diseases, illnesses. There is no weakness to our resurrection body. Currently, there are weaknesses. We are prone to diseases. We're prone to sickness. We're prone to viruses. This hits hard, especially now with this threat of this coronavirus. The fact that if we are exposed, that those of us whose immune system, there are reports that people who are seemingly healthy without any issues have actually succumbed to death after being exposed to this coronavirus. And we have young people who have reportedly died from this virus. There's no respect for people. Some people go without any symptoms. Some people end up dying, right? Our bodies are susceptible to weakness. Sometimes you wake up, your back is sore, your knees are sore. Maybe your ankles. If you take a wrong step, you might break your ankle or sprain your ankle. Things like that. All of these things. The resurrection body, however, is sown in power or ability. And we are not susceptible to any of that kind of stuff. Now, I don't have a definitive answer on the whole ability versus a disability issue. Those of us who experience disability of some sort, whether it's physical disability, whether it's struggling with cerebral palsy, or any other, maybe it's what is that word? Paraplegic, whether you're a paraplegic, or any kind of physical disability, or it could even be a mental disability, some kind of learning disability, learning impediment, or whatever, emotional disability and things like that. This has implications for all that. I don't have all the answers right now. I only had 1 week to prepare this message, but it does have implications for ability and disability. I think some of these things, for those, we see some of these things like in the Gospels where someone who was paraplegic was not able to even walk, where Jesus heals them and they're able to walk. That is a phenomenon that we will experience in the resurrection life. And that is the hope that we can look forward to. If for someone who is suffering or is experiencing a physical disability, that they would overcome that and their bodies will be characterized by power. There will be no threat of coronavirus in the resurrection life. There will be no such thing. That is a characteristic of this life. Fourth, we have a perishable versus imperishable, dishonor versus glory, weakness versus power. And 4, we have natural versus spiritual. The natural bodies. We have a natural body now. That just means it's of this world. Related to of this world. The resurrection body that we can look forward to is a body that is spiritual. That doesn't mean without substance. Spiritual does not mean ghost. Okay? But it's a different kind. A body that is given to us from the Spirit, from God. It's not a body that comes from another human, which is natural, but comes from God, which is spiritual. Okay, that is the distinction here. And in verse 48 to 49, it says, as was the earthly man, referring to Adam, who was the first human being on this earth, so are those who are of the earth, and as is the heavenly man, Jesus Christ, who is the second Adam, so also are those who are of heaven. And then it says, and just as we have borne the image of the earthly man, so shall we bear the image of the heavenly man. We bear the image of Adam because we are his descendants. But in the resurrection, copying Jesus, following Jesus in his resurrection, who led the way for us, where we can now experience the resurrection, we will also resemble him. So what does that look like? Well, Jesus, we look at his resurrection body. First of all, he had holes on his hands and feet. Remember, because he was crucified, right? When he was crucified, it was actually his wrist, literally, but it refers to hand. Okay, so there were holes here that his disciples noticed. That was actually proof that he resurrected from his death. That it was the same body, but a different kind of body. So there is a continuity between this earthly body and the resurrection body. Some sort of continuity that they recognized Jesus. Initially, they didn't recognize him, but then the closer they looked at him, they recognized him. So in our resurrection, in the resurrection life, we will also recognize one another somehow. There will be some sort of continuity between now and then. But it'll be of a different essence. Remember, Jesus kind of just appeared. He sort of teleported into different rooms, right? And so if you think about that for a second, will we be able to teleport in the resurrection life? Will I be able to move from here and say, I kind of want to visit Mount Everest? And I can just kind of teleport to Mount Everest because my body will be of a different substance. I can't say for sure, but it's something interesting to think about at least, isn't it? We can look at more of what Jesus' resurrection body was like and glean from that of what our resurrection body will be like as well. But that is the comparison. I used to think as a kid, when I was first learning about Scripture, Bible, and I thought, well, man, heaven's going to be boring. Because we're just going to be like rolling on clouds. We're like ghosts, kind of floating in the air on clouds, jumping from cloud to cloud. I've got wings, but I also have a harp, and we'll all just be playing harps. And I'm like, I'm not really a harp person. I'm more of a guitar, electric guitar with distortion or something like that, And so heaven wasn't really appealing to me. The afterlife wasn't appealing. I thought, and especially when I was younger, I was like, I have this whole life to look forward to, and I'm just going to I want to live it. I want to live this life. And heaven will just be like we call it, the afterlife. That's an interesting choice of a word, because it's like there's life, and then there's the afterlife, the footnotes, the end notes, And imagine if we were talking about the end notes and it goes on forever. It's like when you watch the movie, right? You have the movie and then you have the credits at the end of the movie, and sometimes you get like bonus scenes. Come back and they do maybe bloopers or there's like bonus scenes. But imagine if the bonus scene was longer than the actual movie. No one's going to watch it, right? That's the wrong mentality to have, actually. It's like, this is like the preview. This life is like the prelude to the actual life that we're going to live in the resurrection. That is the real life. We're not going to be floating on clouds. We're not going to be ghosts just floating around aimlessly. and things like that, but we'll actually possess bodies, physical but spiritual bodies. And I believe the Bible teaches that heaven is actually going to be the new earth. The new heavens and the new earth means that on this earth is going to be radically reformed somehow, and we'll be living on this earth in our resurrected bodies, and there's going to be plenty for us to do, plenty of fun things without the threat of coronaviruses and illnesses and disease and anything like that. It will just only be joy, only be happiness, only bliss, and all that. So, I look forward to that. I look forward to the rest of my life. I think my life is pretty interesting. Maybe I'm the only one. Maybe you look forward to your life too. But you know what? There's actually a greater life that we can look forward to in the end. I mean, how many guys love to travel? I love to travel. I remember doing the cross-country road trip from California to here. I did it twice, actually. First time was when I first moved here with a few of my buddies, and that was amazing. I actually saw North America as a continuous continent from West Coast to East Coast. It was just amazing to see different areas of this continent. And I did it again by myself many years later. It was just amazing. But heaven's going to be like that too. It'd be this new world that we can just discover and travel. And discover. If you think this world is amazing and beautiful, and it is. I mean, I've never seen Northern Lights, but I've heard depictions of it, and it's like, man, I want to see that one day. And there's all these different areas of this world that you want to see. Heaven will be so much more interesting. And yet the thing is that we live as if being a seed is the most important thing. Right? We are still seeds. We haven't been planted yet. Waiting for that time. And we act and live, even as believers in Christ, that being a seed is the most important thing. And we forget the fact that, okay, yes, God has given us this life as a seed to live for now. But there's going to be a time where we're going to be buried in the ground, and then we're going to rise up as a plant. So, if you're an atheist, you're listening to this, if you don't believe in God, then, this life is all there is. And it makes sense. It's consistent to believe in that. This life is all we have, and we better make the best out of it. And once we die, that's it. But if we are a follower of Christ, if we are a believer in God, we know that there is a greater life of resurrection, not just an afterlife, but the actual life that we get to look forward to, the greater future. We're not going to be a seed forever. We're not going to be a caterpillar forever. We have something greater to look forward to. So beloved, loved ones, during this time, during this pandemic season, which is what it's going to be, which is what it is. It's just a season. During this time, let's not just look at what's before us. Let's not just look at, just have tunnel vision. But remember that this life is given to us temporarily, and there's a greater life that we can look forward to. And what we do in this life counts for the actual life. Let's pray.